Hello, it's a
It's a
pleasure to
pleasure to
have
have.
you on this platform today. Hello, can we hear me though? Hello,
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
hello. Oh yeah, good evening everyone. It's a pleasure to have us on this platform today, music training. And I just want to welcome those who've taken the time to, join us in today's workshop or training, however you see it. I can see Engineer Israel, you're welcome. I can see John, you're welcome. I can see Lusana Ernest, and myself, I can see Choir Admin. And do feel free to reach out to anyone you think would benefit from today's workshop to join. We've started, and I know it's going to be a good one for each and every one of us geared towards our, musical development. Um, just before we start, can we just spend 1 or 2 minutes to just pray? Let's just bless the name of the Lord for the opportunity, to be in this space, to be a minister, to be chorister in the vine end of the Lord. Let's just bless the name of the Lord. Let's just thank Him. Thank Him for the opportunity to serve. Thank Him for the opportunity to serve in this capacity. Let's bless the name of the Lord. Thank Him for how He has been helping us. Thank Him for yet again. We're here so that we can make further progress in the propagation of the ministry that God has called us into. Let's just worship the Lord. Let's just thank Him. Let's worship Him, give Him thanks. That's the name of the Lord on behalf of the organizers of this workshop. And it's been going on for some time, covering different topics, different aspects of the choir ministry. And it's been really, really effective. Let's just bless the name of the Lord. Thank Him for the wisdom He has given to the organizers of this workshop. We've had different resource person who comes on to share their knowledge and train us on different aspects and skill we need to enhance, build upon, just so that the kingdom of God would move forward. Let's just bless the name of the Lord. Let's give Him thanks. Let's just ask the Lord that today's session will go smoothly. We won't have any, chase or any chance that the system will work properly. There won't be internet troubles going on and off, that everything will work properly. And even as this concerns using the laptops and other devices that might be needed for this workshop, that everyone participating today, their systems will work effectively. Again, let's just pray for the instrument that God is going to use, the resource person that God is going to use to share this knowledge, to train those of us who are here, that the Lord will bless him, that will not run dry. In the name of Jesus, the Lord will give him more grace. And for those of us who are here, the Lord will open up our brains to understand. The Lord will give us wisdom. And this is not just going to be a tick box for ourselves, but it will help us to improve in our local church, in our regions, and in every capacity we have the opportunity to serve. Lord, we ask that even as we've come here today, we've joined this workshop today for the propagation of the gospel, even to the ministry that you've given unto us. Lord, I pray that as we get on learning today, you give us the wisdom to be able to assimilate all that is being taught today. And further, when we go back, we will begin to practice and the ministry will begin to move forward in the name of Jesus. We pray for the resource person you're going to use today. Lord, I pray you will bless him, even as it's taking time, and as well as the organizer of this program. Lord, I pray your blessing will not run dry in their life in the name of Jesus. Give them more knowledge, give them more wisdom, and even as they have passion towards the growth of this ministry, I pray that they will not lose their reward. For in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And just within a short time, we have about 19 persons online. And if you do have anyone you need to reach out to that would participate from today's workshop, please do reach out. And without any further ado, um, I would like to introduce our resource person. Um, Definitely, you will agree with me that learning how to design, structure, and produce effective backing track to enhance worship is something that every good music minister need, both in our in our churches or in our region, and also for our personal evangelism for those who music as a way of reaching out. I think it's something that is very, very important. And it has been said that I'm sure we all have our instruments, our equipment, that means the laptops and whatsoever we need, whatever device we need to participate fully. And I pray the Lord will help us in Jesus' name. So without further ado, I just want to introduce Bro John Adeshola. Of course, is somebody we all know, and I'll call him the powerhouse of music, as far as my own region is concerned, and I think nationally. And it's been a pleasure working with him, these few years. And he has done really, really magnificent work, and we can all see. And it's a privilege to have him in our midst today, not just to tunes, but to also walk us through with how he does this magic. And if you can, if you can clap, if you can, just an emoji. But John, you're welcome. It's a privilege to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on what time you're listening to this. And thank you very much. I'm not sure about Powerhouse, but let's see how we get on with this evening's presentation. Just before we go ahead, because I've got so many screens over here, so many systems, I want to make sure that everything is functioning properly. I know you can hear me. I know you can see me, judging by the reaction. So I'll try to share my screen. Just a thumbs up, just to make sure that definitely you can see my screen. And then I'll try to share my software as well. Yes, just to make sure that everyone can see me and hear me as well too. I don't know if you can see my screen. Let's get this on full.
Sorry, but John, just 1 minute. And
okay.
Please do feel free to ask question. You can put it in the chat box, or you can just ask as he gets on with the training. So you don't need to wait till the end of the training. So as you're learning, you just ask question as it relates to where you want to improve upon. So yeah, just to add that.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you see my screen? I can see it from here, but just want to make sure everyone can as well. Okay. Okay. I'll take that as a yes. So slides fine, camera is fine, microphone is fine. I'll share another screen just to make sure, because I don't want to begin and then for whatever reason people are not able to. Okay, that's fine. Okay. Okay, I think we're good to go. Let's get back to the slides. Okay, I think we can begin, and thank you all very much for attending tonight's session. Let's have a word of prayer. I normally begin with prayer, if that's okay. Thank you, Lord, for this opportunity to share one or two ideas. Oh God, we ask that the spirit that we need to be able to incorporate, to be able to implement all that we will be discussing, all that we will be learning. We ask that you give unto us the resources that we need, the ideas that we need, the skill set that we need to also further improve. We ask that you would give unto each and every one of us. I have no words of mine, and help us that our discussions tonight would be led and directed by you. For in Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much once again, and a big thank you as well to the leadership of the church, for the privilege as well to share this knowledge. I know we've been having this discussions, if I'm correct, for over a year. It's been in the background. To be fair, we're supposed to have done this last month, obviously due to global activities within the church. Yeah, GCKs, we've had to reschedule, but I'm hoping you'll find something valuable in today's session. And once again, thanks to the leadership for providing this opportunity. Brad Stephen mentioned during his introduction that there's been a lot of different training series. I think this is the 6th episode or the 6th series. So if anything, it goes on to states, the responsibility that we have in terms of music ministers to make sure that we keep honing our skills, and hopefully within the next 2 hours or less, I'll talk to us about what it means to create a backing track. So the first hour, the way I structured this, I was saying to Brian earlier today, it's not a lecture, so please by all means feel free to interrupt me. Feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions, put it in the chat. I'll be more than happy to pick up on those questions. I don't want to leave those questions till later on, because we'll be talking about so many things tonight. I've got over 50 slides to rush through within 2 hours, and I've got a practical session as well. So please, any questions, any concerns, any queries, anything you want me to reiterate, please by all means, ask those questions. But yeah, building a backing track. Many a times when we say backing track, or when people use that term backing track, there's more to it than just that music behind every performance. It's down to some of the foundations as to how can we use this effectively to maybe support, or to maybe enhance, or to maybe even drive our musical experience as vessels, in the vineyard of God. And therefore, the way I've structured this presentation is to first of all look at the purpose. So why backing track? So many people that you may speak to would have different opinions as to the relevance, in our contemporary times, in the kind of denomination that we find ourselves. But why backing tracks? What does it contribute to a performance, or to a production, or to an event? So we'll talk about the purpose, and then I'll go through one or two principles, so one or two techniques, one or two considerations that you need to be thinking about, if you want to sort of do this effectively. I'll be talking about things around, arrangement, layering, tone, timing, several techniques that you can implement. Each should you want to sort of take this idea forward. And then lastly as well too, I'll look into the process. So how do you go from I've got this good idea, or I'm interested in creating this instrumentation for this song. This is my idea. And then how do you go from that idea to the finished, products? So I'll talk you through step-by-step process, time permitting as well. I'll show you practical examples. If you've got your systems, please by all means get them ready, your notepad, whatever that you would find relevant in today's session. My previous slide as well too was mentioned about people having headphones or earphones. I would highly recommend. So if you're not on your headphones or your earphones, please by all means get one. Don't just rely on the sound coming from your device. That would not suffice, for a session like this, because there's so much we'll be talking about in terms of frequency, that if you're not using the right headphones, you might not be able to hear those frequencies properly. So please, make sure that you get those headphones and earphones just to improve the audio experience. So when we say backing track, what then do we mean? What then is a backing track? I've got a very rough definition, and from that definition, I want to pick out one or two things. When we say backing track, we're talking about any pre-recorded audio file. So it could be an instrumental. It could be a vocal file, it could be, some harmonies, layered within a particular song that you can play either during a live performance, or that you can add to your ministration, to make your ministration sound fuller, to provide some more depth, and that's what we mean. And when you think about this, within the context of our daily life as people interested in music, people interested in the choir ministry, even from your day-to-day services, you are using one or two elements in relation to this definition. Let's take, for example, there is, a Sunday service, obviously it's Sunday tomorrow, you might be having a praise and worship session, and probably during your praise and worship session, there might be a drum beat, based on this definition, that drum beat that you're using is more or less a backing track, because we're talking about any pre-recorded audio file. That's the key word, something that you've done already, and then you play that live to help support, to help fill out, to help add depth to your ministration or to your performance. And that's what we mean by backing track. Now, people may look at this in different shape, ways, or form. It could be in the sense of, like I said, it could be there as a form of support rhythmically, in terms of a drum section, in terms of a percussion section. Like I said in the example that I just mentioned, your praise and worship, there might be a drum beat already on your piano. That in itself would function as a backing track. It might be some harmonies. Maybe you've got some lead lines that you probably cannot play live, during that ministration. You have a choir of 10 people, but then not everyone plays instruments, so you need to find a way to fill out those sections. Maybe play some strings or play some brass underneath. That in itself brings out some harmonic richness, and that's what we mean, a pre-recorded audio file. And also as well, so it could be in terms of your voices. Many times you might go for an event, you find out that there's a soloist on stage, but then you can hear backing vocals, in the background, people singing, just to provide, a much fuller sound, even though you can't see them physically, but it's coming from a pre-recorded audio file. That in itself is a backing track. So it could be in any one of these three categories, in terms of rhythm, in terms of harmonies, and in terms of vocal depths. And that's the context by which we'll be having those conversations today. So yeah, that's the definition, the working definition for tonight's workshop. Now, what I'll try to do, God helping, is cover a few learning outcomes. I'll talk to you about the 6 T's, and that's the way I've sort of termed it, just to make sure that I can get all of those content out easily. I'll talk to you about the theology around this. I said earlier on, depending on who you speak to, people feel differently about the use of backing tracks, in ministrations and live performances. So I would try to pick out a few things, talk to you about some truths, some facts in relation to how you can use this, within the administration. Some of the tools and the technology behind that production, in terms of the hardware, in terms of the software that you should be thinking of, that you should be learning how to use to help improve on that skill. I'll talk to you about some techniques, some terminologies that you will hear frequently. If you're going to take this seriously, these are things that you should be conversant with. And then I'll move on to discuss texture. I think texture is everything when it comes to production. How able are you to, pass across emotions? How are you in your production? Have you got key elements, sorted out that can evoke that response that you want from people? And then hopefully towards the end, I'll talk about tracking, what it means to compose, what it means to layer sound, what it means to arrange a sound, together. So those would be the few learning outcomes for today's session. So let's begin with theology. I know it sounds very spiritual, but that's always my starting point. And I always like to go back to the scripture. When you go through the book of Psalm 150, from verse 3 to 6, a very popular psalm that talks about praising the Lord, with the sound of the trumpet, with the psaltery and the harp, with the timbrel or the stringed instrument, the organs, the loud cymbals, the high sounding cymbals, and David concluded in that verse saying, "Let everything that hath breath praise the Lord." And when I read that verse, I'm thinking about this and I'm saying to myself, well, this was David using everything he had, in his own time to praise the Lord, and God was instructing us through David saying, go all out, use the best of the equipments that you can find, the trumpet. When you think about the trumpet today, those playing those brass instruments today would be playing lead lines, melodies, think about the cymbals. That's a percussion instrument, and I'm saying, and I'm reading this and I'm thinking, well, God has something unique in relation to how we can use this within our contemporary times. Just as David was able to make good use of all of those musical resources, that was available in his own time. So also we as, modern day believers, we need to use the best resources that we can find and so on, including backing tracks. These tools are there to help us amplify our worship. It's not there to distract from the key message, but it's there to help support. It's there to help amplify. When you think about a microphone, just the same way a microphone would amplify your voice, it's the same way we use a backing track to amplify musical structure. It's not there to replace worship. It's not there to replace the Spirit of God, but it should be used as a tool, to help support the ministry. And that's the standpoint by which I'm presenting this. Because again, depending on who you speak to, people will tell you, well, when you use backing tracks, it does limit you. It's way too structured. It's way too rigid. You can't put God, in a box. You need that freedom of expression when it comes to worship. But the counter argument to that is when you think about the use of backing track, it's there to prevent chaos. There is a key structure. You can't come outside of that structure, and that in itself helps to, you know, improve on transitions between songs. That helps to improve, on the musicality, the way things sound, when it comes to your ministration. So the summary of this is when we use tools like this, we need to be very intentional. We need to think about the purpose behind it. And that purpose is to help enhance praise. It's there as a tool to support the ministry, not there to replace worship, not there to replace the Spirit of God, but there as an amplifier, to help amplify the way we express our worship to God. So that's my standpoint in relation to theology, in relation to the spiritual element around the use of backing tracks. Now, before I move on, I'll talk to you about a few truths. And when I say truth, I mean facts that you cannot deny. These are things that you need to think about seriously, if you want to take this seriously as well. And the first one I will mention is musical theory. You cannot remove this from the equation. Each and every one of us, we need to have a foundational understanding, a very good understanding of musical theory. I think the good thing about this is when you speak to people within the secular, within a secular environment, they'll tell you, well, we don't need music theory because they are just beat makers. But we, as individuals interested in gospel music, in gospel production, it is very essential. And when I say musical theory, I'm talking about your skills, your major skills, your pentatonic skills, your minor skills, your chromatic skills, your chords, your diminished chords, augmented chord, triads. Do you have a good understanding of all of these things? When we talk about musical modes, your Dorian mode, Lydian mode, Phrygian mode, do you know all of these things? You might not understand the complexities around it, which is fine, but do you have a foundational understanding? Do you have some basic understanding of how theory works? When we say rhythm, do you know what a syncopated rhythm is? Do you know what a polyrhythm is? Because these are principles that you will need to apply, if you're to do this properly. So do not limit yourself. And the only way you will limit yourself is when you limit your musical knowledge, in terms of theory. It is there to make sure that we can expand, we can communicate with other people, with other musicians around. We can fix problem quite quickly, when you have a very good understanding of musical theory. I think another good thing as well too with musical theory is if you know how to, if you have a solid understanding of why something works, you can use that to your advantage. And I'll give you an instance. When it comes to musical production, depending on what song you're looking into, you might need to evoke certain feelings, certain emotion, and when you have a very good understanding of theory, you can do that intentionally. You can do that intentionally. If I was playing a song, or if someone came to me and said, "Well, I need you to produce a song," it is. I want that song to be very somber. I want it to be very reflective. My approach to that particular track would be different. If I'm talking about somber, reflective, I'm thinking minor scales. I'm not going for those happy chords. Those major notes. But if you do not have a good understanding of musical theory, you'll find it difficult, to create those intentional emotional impacts. And I think this is why this in itself is a key truth. It's something that you cannot shy away from. And I would say one thing as well too, make good use of all of those opportunities that you have. Thank God for the leadership. I know within Manchester, within most of the churches within the UK, we tend to have theoretical sessions on music in itself. Some people take time to invest in courses, ARBSM, for those here in the UK, taking on graded musical classes, Muson, they have all of these different grades, all of these different courses that you can take, and that in itself would go a long way. The way I think about this, I think about this as an investment. Many people are always looking for the shortcut. No, it's not a shortcut. You're always interested in, oh, how do I get from, how do I create this track without no understanding why it works? So please make sure that you can understand the key principles around the theories behind music. Now, the second truth about this is production takes time. You cannot rush it, unfortunately. And I'll say this unapologetically. If you do not have the time, then you might as well not bother. Think about this. As an artist, a painter, someone drawing a masterpiece, they don't take their first draft to an exhibition, do they? No. It goes through process of refinement. It takes patience, it takes time, it takes effort. So you need to make sure that you have that time dedicated. That's something you cannot shy away from. If already, you don't have that time to do certain things, then you might as well not bother about the whole process from the very start to the very end. So yeah, make sure that you have enough space, for several iterations, for several refinements, because you would produce a song today, you come back again, you listen to it the next day, you would always find one or two things that you can add to it, one or two things that you can tweak, so you need to make sure that you have that time, that space to refine whatever it is that you're working on. And then as well, too, I want to talk to you about the power and simplicity, the power and simplicity. And the context by which I want to talk about this point is within gospel music. When you look at some of the secular music out there, people focus on, oh, we need to do this, we need to add more to this. But, the key bit here is the message. And the message is in the lyrics of the song. We are just there as a tool to help support that message. Your backing track is there, to help drive on that message. So many a times when it comes to production, there is power in simplicity. Many a times, less is always more. If you know how to execute simple, techniques, many a times the reward of that can be very impactful when you compare it to, complex techniques. So make sure that when you start to take on production, you make sure, yeah, you can keep it very, very, very simple. You're not doing too much in terms of the rhythm. You're not doing too much in terms of the melodies, in terms of the harmonies. Make sure that the core message probably coming through the lyrics, coming through the vocalists. Make sure that you give space for that message to shine through. And that's what we mean when we say there is power in simplicity. And then the last truth I want to talk about is many people have this perception that when it comes to backing track, it's just for the mega churches. It's for your Elevation church, for your Hillsong assemblies, the Maverick music. No, no. I think that's a myth. When you look into the use, let's say in the last 15 to 20 years, you find out that backing tracks in itself does benefit smaller ministries. So don't think about this within the sense of, well, I don't have a big enough church, to implement this within my local assembly. No, you can find ways by which you can start to introduce this, and hopefully at the end of today's session, you can start to think actively about that. One good thing with using backing track is, I said it right there on the slide, when you use it effectively, you can use that to fill out sonic gaps. And when I say sonic gaps, what I mean is, you've got a very small church, you've not got so many instrumentalists, and maybe you have just one pianist, there's only so much that person can do. But when you have the time to create something simple, something done, with love and with care, all of those gaps, maybe you need a string instrument, you need an orchestra section, you need a brass section, or we do not have a live, you can replace those things, in a situation where it's impractical to do so, you can fill out those gaps with the use of a backing track. So yeah, long gone are the days where people used to think, oh, backing tracks is just for the bigger churches, those who have the bigger budgets to spend. No, even as a smaller ministry, you can use this to benefit yourself and the people that you are serving. And hopefully, by God's grace, as we take home that truth, I'm sure that we would start to see, impact in our different ministries. So that's me done with all of the spiritual elements, if that's okay. Now I want to move on to talk about the tools and the technology. Rather than just dive into, how you do it, I think it's more important that we understand the what some of the tools that enables this to be done in the first place? What's some of the tools that you need to own? What's some of the tools that you should be learning how to use? The technology behind the music. We all hear, oh, that's a very nice production. But where has that come from? So I want to make sure that I can spend some time on this section. And please, by all means, feel free to interrupt me. Put in your questions in the chat. I'll be more than happy to pick this up during the presentation. Now, when I say tools and technology, I'll divide this into 3 sections. I'll talk to you about the hardware, and then I'll talk to you about the software, and then how do you merge that together, the integration. So the hardware, the software, and then the integration. And when I say hardware, I'm talking to you about the physical, the tangible components that we can see, as a producer, as someone interested in working on a backing track, on building a backing track. What's not those physical, those tangible components that you need to own, that you need to have before you even get started. And what I'll do with this section is I'll make a few recommendations. Now, these recommendations are based on my own experience. It's based on where the community is at, in terms of production. It's based on things that you can find within the year 2026. Maybe next year there might be something different, but this, from my own experience, would serve the purpose. So I'll talk to you about why, what do you need it for? What's the importance of it? What specifications? I think that's quite important as well. What specifications should you be considering? What should be your budget options? And like I said, if you've got any questions, please by all means do ask them. So I'll start with the engine room. Obviously, you can't create a backing track if you do not have a computer. I'm sure many of you are connected already using your computer, be it a laptop, be it a desktop as well. This is what I refer to as the app bit. Okay, so think about this as an investment, I remember was it 2010, 2009, thereabout, while I was still back in college, that was when I decided to start to dabble into production. And without advice, without research, without recommendations from anybody, the laptop that I was given to work on projects, to work on assignments, that was what I started out using. If anyone remembers the Fruity Loops of those days, I went on to download it, and guess what? That system crashed. I couldn't use it for my dissertation. I couldn't use it for my assignment, nothing, and that was because I couldn't get the advice I needed at that time. So what I'm saying here is think about this as an investment. Whatever computer you're using, you want to be able to use that for a longer period of time, making sure that it can serve you well for the purpose for which you need it. Now, I've got a few specifications right there on the screen, and I'll talk you through each and every one of them and what I think in relation to each of those segments. Now, the first thing there is the processor. Now, depending on whether you're into the Apple ecosystem, for those on who own a MacBook or an iMac, a Mac Mini, you ideally should be looking into the M1 series. Okay, so either the M1 or the M2 or the M3. I know Apple has just released, is it the M5, if I'm not mistaken, but I think as a minimum, if you've got an Apple M1 or an Apple M2, you should be fine. That processor is strong enough, to carry some of the plugins that you might be using for your production. Okay, so that's good enough. And for those who are not on the Apple ecosystem, for those working with Windows computers, Intel, be it your HP, your Lenovo, your Asus, ideally you want to be looking at your i5, okay? Your i5 processing system. I know it goes up to i7, it goes up to i9, I know there's i11, but as the minimum that you should be thinking of, you want to be looking into the i5, the 11th generation. And why is this? It's because when you start working on some productions, I'll talk to you very soon about plugins. The same plugins that require a very good processor to work. If that processor is not strong enough, you'll find out that there will be lag. There might be crackling audio, freezing. You might be working on a project, and all of a sudden your screen just goes blank. So please make sure that if you're thinking about this, these are the recommended specification across the board. And for those of you, working on Linux or working on those gaming system, would always recommend the AMD Ryzen 5 Plus, so these are the basic minimums that you should be thinking of. Now, in terms of the RAM, the minimum, again, I would suggest is 16 gig. Some people would say 8 gig, but then when you start to work with same plugins, which I'll show you very soon, 8 GB of RAM would always struggle. So as a minimum, make sure that you're getting the 16 gigabytes. People would say to you, well, you can manage 8 GB if you're learning, but like I said, think about this as an investment. You don't want to get an 8 GB system right now, and then 2 years later you need to replace that again. So why don't you just invest, for a longer duration, and you know that you're good to go, saving yourself money on the long run. So that's in terms of the RAM. Now, in terms of the storage, as a minimum, 512 gigabytes should be good enough. There are certain virtual instrument files that you may download, about 200 gigabyte plus, and that's why you need enough space. If you have up to a terabyte, that's excellent. If you have more than that, if you have an hard drive where you can move in some of your files into, that's a bonus. But as a minimum, operating standard, you want to be looking into the 512 gigabyte solid state drive, and that's what I would recommend. In terms of storage. Now, in terms of ports, I would say at least 2 USB ports. And the reason why I've gone for at least 2 is because, one, you need to connect your audio. You need to connect your MIDI keyboard. You need to connect your speaker system. You need to connect, certain devices, and that's why you need at least a minimum of 2 USB ports. I know now, with the whole rules and regulation that's coming, it's moving towards USB-C. It's not more USB-A like before. If you've got a USB-C, that's good. That's you future-proofing your computer, future-proofing your engine room, making sure that it would serve you for a very longer time. Now, I've got right there at the very end where it says portability versus workstation. Now, I talk to you. Some people would tend to ask those questions. Should I get a laptop? Should I get a desktop? It's down to you. For me, I've got a laptop where I do some of my production on. And the reason why I've got a laptop is because of that keyword there, portability. There are times where I need to move from a location to another location. There are times when I need to move from an event to another event, and I need access, to be able to do things on the fly. In that case, a laptop works for me. But then the downside to that is obviously the risk. If your laptop gets stolen, that's all your project gone. If for any reason, due to regular moving it around, there's wears and tears, it doesn't it then undermines the purpose, and the other option would be, well, get a desktop computer, set it up nicely in a space, in your home, and you've got a system, you've got a mini studio where you can start to work on your production. Again, some of those decisions might be depending on cost. I'm not here to tell you get this version or get that version. Again, work within your budget and decide on what would be best for you. But definitely, you can't begin this, without not having the engine room ready to go. And any questions, please do feel free to interrupt me, and I'll be more than happy to respond to them. So I'll move on then into the next equipment, which is your audio interface. Now, I call this the hub, or your sound converter. When you think about sound, everyone can hear me. I'm speaking into a microphone. That sound that you are hearing me, that sound that you can hear, is what we call the analog sound. But you need to be able to convert this analog sound into digital audio, and this is where your audio interface comes into play. My recommended specification would be at least 2 inputs. The picture right there on your screen has got two inputs. Should you want to plug in, other instrument like a piano, should you want to plug in a microphone, at least you've got enough inputs that you can use, to plug in other accessories. I always go for 24 beats, or 48 kilohertz. That's the minimum standard. If it's below that, you start to hear crackling in your audio. You start your audio starts to sound like as if it was recorded with a phone. So make sure that all of those key specifications, you can note them down. And when you go into looking for an audio interface, look out for the ones with low latency. Now, when we say low latency, we mean the time. Sorry, not the time. The space in between when you hear an audio, or between when an audio sound is sent and when the receiver hears that audio. That's what we mean by latency. And with low latency drivers, technology has gone far. It reduces that time to the barest minimum that you can't even tell that there is a delay between you playing that sound and between you hearing that sound. So always look out for, drivers with low latency. And then you've also got phantom power, and phantom power are always for condenser microphones. For those of you wanting to plug in a studio microphone, maybe you want to record a vocal, you want to record a guitar, or you want to record someone else playing an instrument. Always look out for audio interfaces that comes with 48-volt phantom power, and you would always be able to see it somewhere at the very back. I've got some very popular examples. The Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, that's the one in red. The Presonus Audio Box, that's another very solid one, USB 96, that you can use. You've got Universal Audio Volt 2 as well. Those are solid examples. In terms of cost, you're looking at less than about 50 to 100 pounds, thereabout, and that would serve you well. That would serve you well. So definitely you need an audio interface if you was to take this forward. And also as well too, you need a MIDI keyboard controller. Okay. And I know before I move on, I can see Joy or Kenwa, you've got a question. Yes, please go ahead.
I know you're talking about the background sound.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning some specification for device.
Yes.
Is there any specification for graphic card?
Good question. That's a very good question. In terms of graphic card, I would say no, because some of the files that you're working on, it's not editing in a way. It's not like Premiere Pro, where you're doing every productions involving graphics. No. So the key focus here is sound. So whatever graphics that whatever graphic card that you have should be fine. I think whatever that comes with the system would always work fine for any software that you might be working on. Yeah, so there isn't much specification in terms of what you should be using for your graphics, if that answers the question.
Okay. So is there any importance of sound card?
Yes, so the sound card is your audio interface. So every computer comes with a sound card by default, but you cannot rely on just that sound card from your computer, because that would not be good enough. You mentioned, so those humming sound, the grounding sound that comes, and that's why you need a dedicated audio interface, and that eliminates all of those buzzing noise that you get in certain recordings. So your audio interface is more or less the same thing as your sound card.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the audio interface. And like I was saying with the MIDI keyboard controller, this is what you need to be able to translate your ideas. I'll show you some demo. Without the MIDI keyboard controller, you would spend so much time, just painting out your notes individually. That's why we always recommend have a separate MIDI keyboard controller. Now, you might ask me, what is the difference between a MIDI keyboard controller and your normal everyday practice keyboard? The difference is that your MIDI keyboard controller sends MIDI file. You find out that most keyboard controllers would not come with an external speaker. Your practice keyboard at home might have an external speaker, which is fine, but most MIDI keyboard controller would not have an external speaker. And that's because the purpose really is just on MIDI. It's just on MIDI. Most MIDI keyboard controllers as well too would be USB powered, meaning that you don't have to run it through, 240 volt AC DC, you're not plugging it to the wall. It just goes right straight into your computer, and that sends MIDI information that your software can recognize. And my recommendations would always be Fortnite keys. For those of you who like to express, in terms of when you play the piano, for those who play the piano, Fortnite key is always ideal. You can get 8 to 1 if you want more octaves, that's fine. But yeah, Fortnite should always be optimum. You can also do a 25 keys as a minimum. What that means, it means that you just be limited to 2 octaves. If you want to express yourself, going up and down the scales, you might not be able to do that on a 25 keys. And that's why we normally say a Fortnite key should always be ideal. Also, you got velocity sensitive keys. So make sure that when you get your MIDI keyboard controller, you're looking out for the velocity. And when we say velocity, think about this as the touch response. So when you play a key, and whether you strike that key hard or soft, your keyboard responds to that. Certain keyboards may not respond to it. When you play it, it sounds the same, either you put pressure or not. So you need to look out for all of those keyboards that accept velocities, that are very sensitive to how you strike the keys, and if it comes with a pitch bend, that's a plus. If it's got a modulation wheel, that's a plus as well, because that allows you to express yourself, in terms of the dynamics, in terms of how you want to shape your sound. And I've got a few examples as well too that you can look into. The very popular ones, the M Audio Key Station. Most people would own that. You've got the Akai, you've got the Novation Launch series. So there's different examples, again, depending on your budget, that you can look into. I've got right there at the very bottom where it says most electronic keyboards can also work as a MIDI controller. I think when I was looking into this, from 1997 to date, most keyboards that were produced post 1997 allows for some form of MIDI interface. Okay, meaning that if you've got a keyboard at the moment, you might be fortunate enough that your keyboard, that your practice keyboard, may work as a MIDI keyboard controller. And what you need to do is just check the back of it. Has it got a USB-B port? Has it got a 5-pin MIDI port? If it has those 2 ports, then definitely your keyboard would work as a MIDI keyboard controller. So that's something that you can check, maybe saving yourself some money. But if not, definitely I would recommend, getting a MIDI keyboard controller, and that makes you, play out the notes that you want to hear. That allows you to create the sound that you want to hear. And that's what we mean by the MIDI keyboard controller. And then also as well, you need a solid headphones. Okay, a studio headphones. I would always recommend a closed back. And the reason why I said closed back is because if you go to most professional studios, or even when you're listening, if it's not closed back, there's always a bleed that comes through the headset where other people can hear, or where that sound interferes with the microphone around. So you want a closed back. People call this what's the word? Noise canceling, sort of. And that's the standard that we tend to use, so that way, there's no bleed coming into or going out into other recording device. And then you want something with a flat frequency response. And what we mean by that is most headphones, if it is not for recording purpose, if it's not for production purpose, they try to boost up frequencies, maybe give it a bit more bass, so that there's that bass boost to the user, but when it comes to production, that deceives you on the long run, because you're thinking, oh, this sounds good, but then when you send out that work into a proper system, it's like, well, you didn't mix this properly. So make sure that it's got a flat frequency response. When you read the labeling or the specification, they will tell you right there, and then you can make those decisions. I've got some examples which I'll not go through. For some people, you might prefer using in-ear monitors. Maybe you just prefer something light on your ear. That's absolutely fine. But make sure that at least you have something. Don't just rely on your laptop or on the sound coming out from your computer. You need to be able to hear those details clearly. You need to be able to hear more intimately, and you need to make sure that you can do this with a proper set of headphones. Also, too, you've got studio monitors. I've gone for a 5 to 7 inch woofer now, depending on the size of your room. You want something that is not too big, but then not too small. You just want something that is perfect for the environment that you find yourself. I would always hardly recommend this. There's a popular phrase in production. People say headphones will lie to you, but then when you put that same mix on a loudspeaker, that's when you actually hear if you've done a very good job. So make sure that you've got a speaker system. It says right there a flat or a neutral sound. Make sure it's not been boosted. Make sure that the frequency, you can see the frequency right there on the screen. It's a flat response. You can see that from 100 hertz and below, it's been trimmed down, so that you can get an equal response in terms of the sound coming out from your speakers. Also, as well, so I've gone with a pair, and what that simply means, it means that you need left and right. So you can't say, oh, I've got this speaker line in my daughter's room, I would use that. No, because you've got 2 sets of ears. You need to be able to hear what's coming out from the left, from the right. I'll talk to you about what we mean by stereo production. You're not just hearing a mono sound. You can do certain things whereby a sound comes out from the left or from the right, or probably from the center. And if you do not have a pair of speakers, you will struggle, to create quality productions. And that's about the speakers. And then again, I'll move on quickly into the microphones. Very simple. You need one that's phantom power. I've gone there for the pickup pattern, or depending on whether you want to do some recordings, some vocal recordings, because like I said, backing track is not just about the music. You can create a backing track full of harmonies. Depending on whether you're stacking up or layering harmonies, you want to be thinking about the pickup pattern. If it's a cardioid microphone, it means that the pickup is in front of you. If it's supercardioid or hypercardioid, it means that sound surrounding the microphone would also be picked up. So think about your circumstance. Think about what you will be using your microphone for. Is it sensitive enough? Does it pick out details? Do you have a neutral frequency? Do you get transparent audio, from your microphone? And again, some examples that you can probably look into if you're thinking about getting one. Also, there's some more accessories that you can add to your microphone. You have the pop filter that stops all those plosive sound, the p, the b, all of this and the t, all of those consonant syllable sounds, it stops that from going into your microphone. You got your recording shield, your haptic feedback that tells you when you're peaking, when your audio is starting to distort. These are other accessories that you can get to your microphone to make you, record clean vocals. People normally use this terminology in production, garbage in, garbage out. If the line going in is not clean enough, trust me, when it comes out at the back end, it's almost as good as if you've not recorded anything. So please make sure that you're using the right equipment, and that in itself would serve you on the long run. And then I've talked about all of the hardware. How do you then put it together? The first thing there is studio layout. So think about the space that you want to work from. Do you have a dedicated room where you want to turn that into a mini studio? Do you just have a working desk at home? Think about the space. Think about what that looks like. It doesn't need to be fancy, but making sure that you have a dedicated space is important. I've got a take-home point there that says great music really comes from a very chaotic space. You need to be very organized, because everything about music is creativity. Anything that would limit your creativity, you need to make sure that you can avoid it. So think about your layout. Is your space open to the window, where there's disturbance, where there's traffic going on around? How does that impact on your creativity? And also as well to think about the space and the placement. The placement is also important, because again, we're dealing with frequencies, we're dealing with sound reflections, we're dealing with sound leakages. If there's too many windows in a room, that sound may reflect. If your ceiling is low, that sound in itself might start to sound very boxy. So think about all of those little details, because on the long run, it does impact in terms of your final product. And also signal chain. What I mean by signal chain is, what goes where. Like I said, the computer is the hardware. Okay, and after the computer is your audio interface. And you find out that many of your connection goes in through your audio interface. The picture right there on the screen, you can see the condenser microphone going straight into the audio interface, your studio monitor going into the audio interface, the headphones going into the audio interface, the computer going into the audio interface, the keyboard as well, so that is the art bit, everything working together. So make sure that, that signal chain, you can get that correctly, in terms of the cabling. There's lots of tutorials out there. There's lots of people as well to you on the call that will be able to, make recommendations, help you in setting things up. And then system integration. What is the system integration? We mean making sure that all of your devices are up to date, in terms of the OS. Have you updated them? Are you using the latest firmware? Do you need to install a driver? Some of this MIDI keyboard, all of the studio monitor, you need to install a separate file, to be able to use them optimally. So make sure that in terms of how you set up, in terms of how you configure your system, you can put everything all together properly. And that's the starting point. Like I said, I don't want to go straight into this is the backing track without you not understanding, the certain intricacies that goes into that process. So that's what we mean when we talk about the hardware. Now, before I leave this point, I just want to emphasize, that great production in itself, it's not just about having the most expensive gear. It's about knowing how to use the gear you have. There are two key individuals that I tend to follow, and if anyone is familiar with them, Jacob has won so many Grammys out there in the secular world, but his style of production is very unique. It takes the most random thing and uses it within its production. The way he approaches music, or production in general, it's not just about having, oh, I've got this, it's not about the tool, it's about knowing what you have and knowing how to use them. So don't fall into this trap of, oh, that's a lot that I need to get, that in itself is limiting me. No, you just need to have the basic minimum, and you should be good to go. You should be good to go. I've got a clip. Maybe I'll play that at the very end. Charlie Puth. Is an American singer. And it takes the most random thing. And uses that to produce music. And again, that underestimates that point. Reiterating that point, saying that you do not need to have most equipment. Just having the basic knowledge of how to use it is good enough. And that's what we mean by all of the hardware that you need to put together. Now, I'll move on from there into the software. And in terms of software, I mean the tools that you cannot see, obviously, but without these tools on your computer, you cannot produce music. And if you do not get anything from everything I've said within the last hour, please make sure that you can get a digital audio workstation, because this is important. Without a DAW or a digital audio workstation, you cannot make music. You can't produce music. And this is the core software, because this is what determines your workflow. This is what determines the way you can arrange song, in terms of how you can layout them, in terms of the plugins that you can use, in terms of the virtual instrument. Oh, I'm creating this song, I want to add a piano, I want to add a violin. You do that on this software, on your digital audio workstation. This is where everything happens in terms of the recording, the arranging, the mixing, the mastering, the editing, and this is the most critical that you've got to get. Now, I've got a few examples. I'm not going to tell you get this one, get that one, because what I want you to do is make that decision yourself. I'll tell you about what I use. If I was to make any recommendations, I'll try to do that. But at the end of the day, you've got to figure out what works for you. And I've got it right there at the very bottom that you do not need to learn all 5. There's about 7, 8 DAWs out there in the market. You don't need to learn every one of them. All you need to do is just master one in-depthly. Find your comfort zone, and understand what it means to use that DAW effectively. Some of the popular examples, I would walk through them. I've got on my screen 4 different popular examples when it comes to gospel production. You've got Logic, FL Studio, Pro Tools, Ableton. When you think about, let's start with Logic. When you think about Logic, in terms of the interface, this is a screenshot of a Logic interface. In terms of the interface, it's got one of the nicest interface that you would ever find when it comes to music production. In terms of the UI, in terms of the UX, in terms of how intuitive it is for people to learn, it's one of the best. And one plus as well with Logic is that it comes preloaded with quality virtual instruments. Okay, so you do not need to get separate additional software instruments, because many times Logic comes preloaded with those virtual instruments. However, the downside with Logic is that this is only available just for Mac users. Okay, so if you've got a Windows PC, you would not be able to use Logic. So that's something to think about. Do you want to just dial in straight into the Apple ecosystem? Have you got a MacBook? Do you just want to stay within the Apple community, and do your productions in Logic? But definitely, so many gospel producers out there tend to use Logic because of that modern look. It's quite intuitive to learn. Apart from that limitation of this just being available on the Apple ecosystem, it works pretty much well for any production. So that's about Logic quickly. Also as well, you've got FL Studio. FL Studio is always regarded as one of the oldest DAWs available. I think the initial version, the first version, was created in 1997, so it's been around that long. Currently now we're on version 25, and the way FL Studio works, you can see from the screen, there's different section, there's your browser tab on the left. That's where you select the different sounds that you want to use. Your channel rack, that's where you import the sound from the browser into the channel rack, you arrange the sound, FPC, synth growler, the different sounds that you want to use. And then you've got your mixer window, you've got your piano roll where you play out the sounds, you've got your playlist where you start to arrange the different sounds that you're using. So it's a very popular tool, and it is very good. If for those who are interested in making instrumentals, for those interested in making beats, things like melodies, it is very intuitive. And I think they've got a demo version as well too that you do not need to pay anything for, and that's why I said pick out one DAW, learn it thoroughly, explore it properly, and then you can then make a decision, an informed decision as to whether you want to stay with it. And I think most of these DAWs as well too, most of these, softwares, they come with the trial version that you can download on your computer and then, walk around the interface, see the way it works, and then you can make that conscious decision yourself. Now, after FL Studio, I'll talk about Pro Tools. Now, Pro Tools is widely considered as the industry standard. If you go to some recording studios, some mixing studios, you would always find that the producers in there would use Pro Tools. People who work in film, in television, in high-end music productions would always use Pro Tools. And that's because it has this very powerful audio editing interface. The mixing environment, it works good. If you're comping, if you're doing precision editing, on different files, you can do this effectively. Personally, I work with Pro Tools, and it serves me well, for all of the processes that I tend to use it for. So I would definitely recommend this if anyone is interested, in taking this forward. I've got a slide where I was supposed to share. Let me see if I can share that. Where are we? Let me see if I've got a link to their website. So I thought I opened that just before. Oh yeah. So that's Pro Tools. Okay. Yeah, there's different versions of it. So there's the artist version for as low as £8 a month. There's a studio version, there's the ultimate version. And if you're not interested in paying for it at the moment, they have the Pro Tools first. No, the Pro Tools Intro. Okay, and that one is free. Pro Tools Intro is free forever. So you can download that, and try it out, see the way it works for you. If it's something that you will enjoy working on. Like I said, it is key. Without that audio without that software, without a software, you can't effectively take on any production that you want to do. Okay, let me go back to sharing my slide and then we'll rush back into the practical elements in a bit. Where are we? There we are. Okay, so just bear with me and let me get my slide back up on the screen. Okay, that one. There we go. So that's Pro Tools. That's Pro Tools. And then the last one I wanted to talk about was Ableton. Okay, Ableton is another DAW that you can download if you want to see what it looks like. People tend to use this within electronic music, house music, experimental music, but it is good as well. You find out that within the gospel community, people use this for live performances, because it's got different interface where you can loop things, you can use this within a concert. So again, like I said, you've got all of those 4 key examples right there again on the screen: Logic, FL Studio, Pro Tools, and Ableton. And then you decide on what you want to use, for your own production. And then after that, you've got your virtual instruments. Okay, so when it comes to production, basically you're working with sounds, you're working with sound frequencies. You're creating your own sound, be it piano, strings, organs, all of this, they all come as virtual instruments. And the reason why I call it virtual instruments is because you can't see them, obviously, and that's the purpose of your MIDI keyboard, to play this instrument from these different plugins and turn them into digital sound, that then becomes what people can hear. And why is this important? Because you can't replace, live instrument. When you don't have, let's say, a guitarist, or a bassist, you can play this virtual instrument. You can provide professional sound, and that in itself expands your creativity. And again, lots of examples out there that you can look into, popular examples, Native Instrument. I'll recommend that for anyone wanting to look into veteran instruments. Keyscape, if you're looking for very nice piano sounds, pad sounds, brass sounds, Keyscape definitely would provide all of those options. And yeah, that's what we mean by some of those key softwares that you need to be able to understand to do this properly. Now, I'll move on swiftly from this to then talk about a few techniques. And I'll start by moving into tonality and texture, because don't forget, at the end of the day, you're dealing with sound frequencies. That's what you're doing as producers, listening to different sounds, you need to think about the texture. And before we talk about the texture, there are a few things that we need to understand, because all of these different principles would undermine the effectiveness or the quality of the tracks that you produce. The first one is the tempo. And when we say tempo, we mean the speed of your music, when it comes to production, there's got to be a tempo. And I've got right there, different tempos. You need to be able to understand which one is which. If I said to you, I need you to create a worship track for me, you should have an idea in terms of roughly where those worship tempos sit, within the tempo scale. I'll tell you, most worship songs fall into the adagio tempo, looking at between 66 to 76, very calm, very easy. If I said to you, well, you're going to produce a backing track for me on this aim. Most aim would always be within a 76 to 108 tempo, depending on how fast or how slow, very andante, very relaxed walking pace. If I said to you, oh, brother, please help us work on this African song, African praise, that's upbeat. You're looking at moderato, between 108 and 120 BPM. So it's always important that you are able to understand tempo. If someone plays a sample track for you, you can sort of deduce, where that tempo is. You know when it is too quick, when it is too slow, because that is very important when it comes to production. And not just tempo as well too. Rhythm is important. I want to say rhythm, it simply means the way you organize your sound depending on the length. You need to have a very good understanding of rhythm. And this is where all of your musical theory comes into play. Your 2/4 beat, your 3/4 beat, your 6/8 beat. If I say, oh, there's a dotted note, or you need to play a triplet pattern or a quiver pattern, do you know what a quiver note is? You know what a crotchet note is? These are all very important, techniques that we need to understand if we are to do this properly. And also as well too, we have dynamics. And when we say dynamics, we mean how quiet or how loud a particular sound is. And why is this important? This is important because this helps with the mood of the music, with the way the music feels. The same music that are very loud, but then the same music that are very calm and very quiet. You need to be able to understand the use of dynamics when it comes to production. Are there certain sections, where you want to dial it down? Are there certain sections where you need to up the loudness, in terms of the way the music feels, in terms of the mood of the music. So dynamics as well too is very important. And then as well too, you got pitch. And when we say pitch, we mean, how high, how low is the sound. The same sound that, well, certain productions whereby, you can't play a piccolo there, because that piccolo would sound very high. You can't play a double bass within the section. So understand where different pitch would come into play within your production. And then as well too, you got texture. And when we say texture, we mean how can you combine, how can you mix, how can you lay out different sounds. The way we approach sound when it comes to production, you're thinking about this as a color. Okay, if I was to mix different colors together, let's say red and blue, I will get a different color. If I was to mix white and black, that produces a completely different color, maybe gray, and that's the same thing as well too. When you layer up different sound, maybe a thin sound, just a melody line or a melody with harmony, that produces something differently. So within your production, you need to be thinking about the texture. Are there certain aspect, maybe in the bridge or in the chorus, where you need a different texture? You need to layer different instruments to produce something completely different. So texture in itself is very important when it comes to production. And then lastly as well too, you've got this. People call it timbre, but it's not timbre, it's pronounced as timbre. Okay, and as a chorister, as someone interested in music, even when we sing, we all have different timbre, and same as well too when it comes to production, a guitar is different. An acoustic guitar is different from a lead guitar. A lead guitar is different from a sitar. A sitar is different from a banjo. Do you understand the differences in these instruments? Let's say I had a muted trumpet or a concert trumpet or a jazz trumpet. Even though they're all trumpets, they would produce different musical colors. So being able to understand these different colors when it comes to production is very important. I can go on and on. If someone brings out a keyboard today and selects Honky Tonky, grand piano or bright piano, even though these are all pianos, the characteristics of these pianos they're all different. They would all sound different. So being able to identify what exactly you want, what type of timbre works within the music that you're creating. Do you want something very loud, something very bright, or do you want it very cool or calm or soft? That determines the type of the instrument that you use. And hopefully once you can follow those principles, you'll be on a very good way to producing effective quality backing track. I know I've done a lot of talking, so I would ask a few questions by talking about quizzing your musical year. And I say this to my wife anytime we drive around. Let's say we're going to the shop, and we've got music playing in the background. I say to her many times, even though we're listening to the same music, in reality we are not, because what you're listening to is different from what I'm listening to. And the point I'm trying to drive at is, for you to do this effectively, you need to think like a producer, and that means deconstructing. You need to get into the habit of thinking like a producer. You're at a train station, there's a train announcement, think about it. What kind of sound is that? Ding dong. What timbre is that? What instrument? If you were to replicate that, what instrument would provide that song? I'm sorry, provide that sound, make sure that you can analyze, the sound that you hear, the instrument that you see. Think about the pitch, make sure that you can conduct blind tests. Many a times within our denomination, if it's not the traditional deeper life instrument, many people struggle to identify, not just by look, but even by sound. I've got 5 instruments right there on the screen. If I play the clarinet and an oboe at the same time, would you be able to identify which is which? That's the question. So being able to identify your instruments, not just by the way it looks, but by the way it sounds, it's very important. I've got a case in point. Unfortunately, the video would not play, but if I was to play a xylophone and a glockenspiel and a celeste and a marimba, would you be able to identify which is which? Because when it comes to production, you might need these instruments, but being able to identify them goes a long way. So I've said that. I want to put it to the test. And please, in the comment section, please feel free to respond. If you want to unmute yourself. I've got a picture right there on the screen. What instrument is that? Anyway. Some might respond saying it's a drum, probably. But what type of drum is that? Maybe the drum that they play in some other white garment denomination, maybe. But what is it called? Probably to make it much easier. The top and the bottom. Just put that in the comments. What would you call the drum on top and the drum on the bottom? Any ideas? Let's see. Anybody?
Okay.
Try it. There's no wrong answer. Okay, someone said a bongo, a conga. Which one is the bongo? Which one is a conga? Let's see. Which is a bongo? Which is a conga? Is it the top one? The bottom one? Which one? Bongo is the bottom one. Okay. Okay. Just to save some time. The top one is a bongo, and the bottom one is a conga. Okay. Being able to identify instrument by their name, like I said, by the way it looks, is very important. Because when you go back into those virtual instruments, you won't just see drums, you will see bongos, you will see congas. But if you don't know how each of them sounds like, you struggle to then use them effectively within your production. I'll give you another example. 3 instruments right there on the screen. They're all string instruments. Just put it right there, or just unmute yourself from left to right. What are they called? Can you identify them? I think one should be obvious. But let's see if we can identify the remaining 2. What's the instrument on the left, the one in the middle, the one in the right? Anyone? Just unmute yourself. There's no wrong answer.
The right is harp. I think that's the one that is obvious.
Yes, thank you. Definitely, the right one is up. Anyone who can help us with the one in the middle, the one on the left? Any idea? No? Okay.
The one,
Yes, go on.
the one on the
Environment.
left is a banjo, I think.
Okay, yes, that's good. That's good. Anyone who can help us with the one in the middle? Okay, that's fine. Thank you so much for the response. The one in the middle is a sitar. It's a sitar. You find that people within the Middle Eastern country, play that a lot. Now, why have I brought this? These are all string instruments. Someone says play a guitar. They all sound like guitar. If you hear them, but there are differences in their textures. In the characteristics of this instrument. The pitch, the texture, the timbre, they all sound different. Maybe one is brighter, maybe one is softer, maybe one has a lower pitch, and that's being able to identify, these different sounds is important when it comes to production. And I can go on and on. Someone talks about oboe and a basson. Do you know the difference in sound? Let's try this one. The final one. 5 examples. I think this one should be pretty simple. These are all instruments that we use in our orchestra. But let's see. I think I've added a few that we may not be using at the moment. Anyone? Just unmute yourself. Throw the response out. Let's all hear.
Okay, from the left is the flute.
That one is flute.
Flute, yes.
1 is flute. 3
Yes.
is clarinet.
Thank you.
That's a
Yeah.
clarinet. 4 is basson.
Yes.
No, yeah. Then number 5. Number 5, no.
That's fine. Anyone wants to help us with number 5 and number 2?
Number 5 should be the English horn.
The English horn. Thank you. How about number 2?
Number 2 should be, is it oboe?
Oboe, yes,
Yeah.
that is it. Thank you very much. Very well said. And that's what I mean. We might struggle, even though we know these things, but because probably we don't play them a lot, or we don't know what they sound like, it might be difficult. And when it comes to production, there might be instances, you might be working on an orchestral piece, whereby you need to bring in all of these different instruments. If you don't know what to look for based on how they sound, you will struggle. And hopefully, I think the goal from this is that we would learn how to further deconstruct, identify instruments, even just from, random radio station, music playing on the radio. Think about, oh, that song is playing in the background. What instrument am I hearing? What are they using? Is that a piano sound? Is that a guitar sound? Oh, is that a banjo? Does that sound like a ukulele? Think about the different sounds coming out. I was going to do this activity with us, but because of time, I'm very conscious of time. I was to deconstruct the instrumentation, take note of the arrangement. It's this popular song by Ron Kenoly, Morning into Dancing, but time would fail us. And the point I was going to drive with this is being able to understand your arrangement. Actually, let's do it together. I think we would benefit from it. So I will stop sharing this, and then I'll go into YouTube, and I would encourage you to just pay attention. And what I want you to do while you listen to the YouTube track is think of what instruments are you hearing? What are the instruments doing? What's the arrangement like? That's what I want to find out. I'll just play a section of the song. I'm not going to play everything because of time, but think about what is the instrument doing? At what point are they doing anything if they are? Okay, so I'll share back my screen. No, not that one. Okay, there we go. So just pay attention, listen to the song, think of the arrangements. What are the different instruments doing within that section, which I'll be playing it for. So right from here.
Where there once was only hurt, he gave his healing hand. Where there once was only pain, you brought comfort like a friend. I feel the sweetness of your love, piercing my darkness. I see the bright and morning sun as it ushers in your joyful gladness. You turn my morning into dancing again.
Okay, I'll stop it there. Can anyone just unmute yourself? Talk me through what you've just heard in the last 47 seconds that I've just played. Anyone? You'd have to write. It's just what you've heard quickly. Yes, Sister Joy.
I think flute.
Flute. Okay. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, it appears they use flute for intro,
Okay.
but there's another instrument that we're using as, and I don't know if I should put it as ad-lib, but I don't know the instrument. It's strange.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Very, very good attempt. Thank you so much, Sister Joy. Yeah, any other person? What else were you able to hear in the arrangement in terms of the vocals, in terms of the instruments that was being played? Anyone? Yes, Brother Samuel.
I think I had the keyboard on the background with
Okay.
some string, a guitar too.
Okay. Some strings, some keyboards, some guitar. Okay. What else again? Thank you so much, Brother Samuel. Sister Naomi, guitar, drum, and bass in the back. That's important. That was what I wanted you to pick up. If you listen to the first few sections that I played, you notice that there wasn't any instrument apart from the drum and the bass, and this is where arrangement comes into play. Many times as producers, you need to think about the whole mix in itself. After the flautist introduced that section, that was it. It was just the drum and the bass with the men singing. And then after that, towards the end, all the other instruments came in. And after that, it dropped again. And the ladies came in again to sing. So it's intentional, as people interested in music, it's not everything you play from the beginning to the end. You need to leave space for the music to breathe. You need to leave space, for the vocalists to also do their own thing. And that's the same approach when it comes to production in terms of the arrangement. How are you arranging your track? Is your track busy, right from the very beginning to the very end? Is there space, to do other things as well too? And just like you saw, what sounds are you hearing? Definitely, the bass playing heavily syncopated lines, just going along with the drum. There's some percussion instruments as well too. The flute is coming in as a call and response. That happened when the men were singing. So think about all of those deliberate points, where you can create those impacts, and that would help massively. So I'll move on from there because of time to talk about some of the terminologies. And I think this is where I'll go into some of the practical sessions. When it comes to music production, there are certain terminologies that you must be conversant with. You will hear a lot about equalization, also known as EQ. And when we say EQ, it means changing the sound frequency, we can spend another weeks and months, going through each of these different terminologies. But I'll just provide a summary. EQ is important. Being able to decide on, what frequency is too loud or too low, goes a long way. And I'll show you an example shortly of what I mean. Another is reverb. Many times you go into a hall and you get that feedback. You clap in a very quiet room and you don't get any response. But then you go into a massive cathedral, and that feedback, that resonance, hits you right away. And that's what we mean by reverb. Many times you can use this when it comes to production, because that adds some more element, it adds some more drama, some more impact in terms of your production. Delay, people call this echo, where it's there for a reason, it's there and it should be used intentionally, for emphasis. Maybe there's a certain word or there's a certain line you want to create more emphasis. You can add a delay effect, to repeat it several times, or probably to fill up the space. Maybe there's a section in your production that is very quiet. You can add a delay effect, just to make sure that quietness, is being taken away. And then compression is what we mean by bringing your mix together, gluing it together. You've got this sound, you've got a drum, you've got a keyboard, you've got a guitar. You need to compress it, and that's what we mean by the glue, being able to compress your sound effectively. Now, when it comes to gospel production, there are certain instruments that you cannot do away with. And like I said, tone is everything. The way your sound, the way your final production comes out, is down to how well you're able to shape the tone. When it comes to gospel songs, definitely there would always be a rhythm. That rhythm can come in the form of a drum, it could be a percussion or a shaker, or just something to keep the rhythm. But make sure that when you have a rhythm section, it's not harsh, it's controlled, very controlled. And I know with the limitations that we have within our own church, there's limit as to how much drums you can use in a song, but despite those limitations, you can still produce an effective track, without all of those powerful, undertones that comes with the rhythm section. And also as well too, you got main keys, your auxiliary keys, be it the organ sound, is the song being driven by an organ, have you got all of those different layers of sound to emphasize certain beats, maybe the melodies or the harmonies within your song, can you have all of these embedded within your production? Also as well too, you got atmosphere, many a times people hear certain things, you play a worship song by Todd Dulaney, but and right from the very beginning, there's that presence that feels the song. You play a worship track by who else again? William McDowell, and you can feel that presence already, and that's the atmosphere, that's the pad, providing, elevating that worship moment, and all of these are important components when it comes to producing. We mentioned the guitar as well too. Is it an acoustic guitar? Is it an electric guitar? Is it an effects guitar? Can you use all of these different tones, in a controlled way, without aggression? It's not a rock band, it's not a rock concert. Can you provide clarity without all of the aggression that comes from the use of a guitar? And then obviously you got the bass, and that's what keeps the mix grounded. That's the foundation. Different types of bass. Now, depending on the type of song that you are producing, you might need to use different bases, for different songs. So again, play with your sound, know which one works best, with the emotions that you are trying to convey. And then there's something I call air candies. Many times, you don't hear them, but you can feel it. You can feel it. Your sweepers, your arpeggiators, your transitions, it's there to support the sound, making sure that those sounds, it's very expressive, very, very expressive. And these are the key instruments that you need to be thinking about when it comes to a production. Now, I'll jump all of these slides because I want to go on into this bit. And this is where I want to sort of show you an example of what I've said. So my plan was for us to create a backing track, hopefully within the next half an hour. And please, by all means, interrupt me. I'll talk you through my process, using some of these determinants, everything that I've mentioned in terms of the tempo, in terms of the time signature, the mood, the dynamics, the texture. I would answer these questions and turn that into a backing track. And let's say we're given a brief and I said to you, oh, Brakile, but we want you to create a backing track. We have a praise night, happening in church next week. These are the different songs, can we get something to support the choir? Or we have a worship song, or we have this hymn that we want to sing, but we want it to sound full. We just want it to sound very, orthodox. Can you do something for us? These are the key determinants that I will be asking the person giving me that job, saying, well, what's the tempo of this song? Is it slow? Is it moderate? Do you want it fast? Is it very fast? You need to determine all of these things before you begin. What's the time signature? Is it 2/4? Is it 4/4? Is it 12/8? Has it got a swing pattern to it? What's the key? Is it C major, D minor, B flat? What's the mood that you're trying to convey? Is it a reflective song? Is it a pensive song? Is it a jubilant song? Because depending on the mood, that will then determine the chords that you will be using. Is it a sad song? Do you want to use more minor chords? Is it funky? Do you want to use jazz chords? That would determine the chords and the progressions that you will be using. In terms of the dynamics, is it a very loud song? Is it very emotive? Is a textural one of calmness? You need to make sure that you can understand all of those determinants. What genre do you want to produce this song in? Is it a ballad song? Is it an Afro song? Is it a jazz song? Is it quite churchy? Very southern gospel? Thinking about all of those determinants, that would then decide on the melody and the voicings that you need to then use. So having said all of that, this is where I would jump into my Pro Tools and probably just do a live demo. Again, this is my Pro Tools window, and please, by all means, feel free to interrupt me. But let's say, like I said, we're given this task, to produce a worship track. Let's say I'm selecting a song and I'm going to call that song. Everyone knows Who Is Like Unto Thee. Who is like unto thee? So let's say it said to me, well, we want you to produce that song for us. I go into my Pro Tools track, type in the name of the song, create a new project file. Don't save. So that was a previous work I was doing before this session. Okay. So that should open up a new file for me, and then we'll talk through the productions. Okay, so we've got the new file ready to go. And the first thing I said was we need to determine what our tempo is. I know the song, Who is Like Unto Thee. I know it's a worship song. And because it is a worship song, it can't be very fast. I'm looking at between the 65 to 70 beats per minute in terms of my tempo. So let's say 70. Let's say 70. So I go into my tempo right there and I put my 70 right there, So I've got the whole edit window ready to go. If you look right there, it says it there that my tempo is 70 beats per minute, and that's what we want. Now, in terms of my time signature, it said my time signature is 4/4. I can change this to a 3, a 3/6 if I want, whatever other time signature. But I think for this song, a 4/4 is good, just a standard 4/4. So that is fine. And that's how to get started. Now, what I then need to do is I need a metronome just to keep me in time. So I go into a track list and then I create a click track, and if you can hear the audio loud and clear, you can hear the countdown, in terms of keeping me in sync. 2, 3, 4. So that's the tempo that I'm working with. And again, we know the tempo, we know the time signature. Now, this is where I need to decide on what key I want to use. Okay, so they've said to me, create the song. The choir will be singing in the key of E flat, So I know my key, and that's what I will be playing on my keyboard, which is right here. You can't see that on camera, but it's just right here. So what I need to do is, remember earlier on we talked about virtual instrument. This is where I then need to bring in my virtual instrument. I can't play this on my physical keyboard. That's why I've got my virtual instrument. I've got my plugin. So I go into my track, go into new, and then decide on how many virtual instruments. Let's start with 4 virtual instruments. So I change that figure from 1 to 4. And then I decide on, well, do I want this in mono or stereo? Let's say mono, because of the limitations with Zoom. Most people will not be able to hear a stereo mix because we're on Zoom. So let's say let's do a mono, and then I go in here to create an instrument track. Okay, and once I click on create, I've got all of the 4 different instrument track right there, and we are good to go. So all I need to do then is going to start to select my instruments. So do I want a piano sound? Do I want a guitar sound? Do I want a bass sound? Do I want to create the drums first of all? Because like I said, this is a worship song. Who is like unto thee? I need to make those decisions and then start to work on my production. So let's start with the first one. I'm going to open up a separate file where I'm going to select the instrument that I want to use for this particular production. Just bear with me, and then I'll pull up my other screen. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Sorry, just bear with me. I'm trying to pull up my instrument track. There we go. Okay, so you should be able to see this. So this is where I then select the instrument that I want to start with. Okay, so for me, when it comes to production, I always like to start with my rhythm section, because once I have my rhythm section locked down, that's my metronome already. That's what gives me that's what keeps me in time, and then I can then start to work on the melodies. I can start to then work on my harmonies. I can start to then work on my ear candies, start to layer up the sound. So let's start with drawing in, let's start with a shaker. Okay, let's start with some percussions. So I go in there, I select my virtual instrument. Now, those are the virtual instruments that I have. So I go in there and then I select my virtual instrument. And that's it right there. And then I decide on which type of percussion I want to bring in. Let's start with a shaker. I'm sure some of us would know what a shaker is. Think about a shaker. It's very similar to a tambourine, but it's got a very low tone. It's not as aggressive as a tambourine, as a tambourine. So I look for something close to a shaker right there. Let me see. So got shaking percussions. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so I've got my shaker right there. My instrument track is on, and then I'm going to go back into my edit window and try to record this percussion instrument. So we're back on the edit window now. I'm sure you can hear the metronome. So the metronome will keep us in time. Okay, so the metronome is going to keep us in time while we then go on to record the percussions. Okay, so just bear with me. Let me pull this back up again. There we go. Percussions. Okay, I'm sure you can. I don't know if you can hear that. Hopefully you can. So let's record our shaker element. So to name this as a shaker. So just a very simple shake on the metronome. Let's go to the beginning of that file. Okay, so press record to say count me in, and then I'll just record a normal shaker. Okay, so that should do. And then I'll make sure that that's definitely on the grid. So there we go. So that's sounding good. So with that, I can work with that. But let's make it sound more punchy as well. So let's get a tambourine as well. So I'll create another instrument track. I'll name that a tambourine, and then I'll go back into to select my tambourine. Okay, so that's sounding good already. Okay, so this is where I'm going to select my tambourine, go right there, go into my plugins, look out for more virtual instruments, you know, and then go in here to look for where it says percussions. Let's see if we can find a tambourine. Tambourine should be somewhere here. There we go. That's a tambourine. Okay, so that's a tambourine sound. So I'm going to add that to the mix. Okay, so let's record a tambourine. Just there we go. So just a very simple movement there with the tambourine. Okay, so I've got my shakers, I've got my tambourine. Let's loop that. We can loop that multiple times. So that's good enough for me. Earlier on we talked about a conga, didn't we? So let's bring in a conga here as well too, and see what that sounds like. Okay, so I'll go back again, look for my virtual instruments where all of my conga sounds are located, and then so we're back on my virtual instruments, and then I'm just going to click on here, look out for what type of conga I would prefer in this category. Let's see, percussions. Okay, we can do that. Let's see, conga menu 1. Let's try this one. Let's try that. So you should be able to hear the conga come now. Okay, so that's our conga sound, sounding very good. And then let's go back to record the conga, and then we'll take some questions before we move on from the rhythm section. So here comes the conga now. Okay, so I like that. Just a very simple conga movement, you know, nothing too serious. Bra Tayo, quickly, you got a question?
Yeah, thank you very much, bro John.
Yes, sir.
I didn't quite get how you duplicated the
files.
The files.
Yeah, that's fine. So
and how you looped it so
Okay.
that they are all together.
Yeah, so I just used a shortcut function on my keyboard, Command D or Control D. That should duplicate any file. So you just select the file. So that's a tambourine, and then just press Command D, and then it loops it into the next segment. And then to loop it, just right there where my cursor is hovering, you know, you select the region, the sections that you want to continuously repeat, and then highlight it, and then that should loop that entire file.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So let's hear what it sounds like. So now we've got the shakers, the tambourine, and the conga. Okay, ready to go. So that sounds good. Let me turn off the metronome. Metronome is the click one here. Let me rename it as metronome. So that's what it sounds like. So that's good enough. Very good enough. So remember earlier on, I mentioned equalization. You know, I mentioned some of those techniques that you can definitely apply to make your mix sound much better. Now, this is where I'll start to bring them into play. So if you go into the mix window, I'll close this. These are all the files currently playing at the moment. Let me keep them playing so that you can hear them. So you can see right there, it says that's a shaker, that's a tambourine, that's a conga. Okay, so let's say the conga, let me add some equalization, some EQ to it. I think the low end is a bit heavy, okay, because I don't want that low end to be heavy. I'm still going to bring in a bass, you know, so I'm just going to go in there, get my equalization. Again, I know this is a crash course on mixing, you know, but I'm just showing you the principles. We can always pick up on this, you know. I know that the bass frequency sits between 100 Hz, so I'm going to pull it down slightly, you know, just make sure that it doesn't clash with other low sounding frequency. This is what we mean when we're talking about frequency. Production is all about frequency. It's all about frequency, being able to understand your sound. You know, I know with a tambourine is sort of slightly pitched up higher, you know, so that's not going to clash with any low sounding frequencies, you know. But when it comes to my vocals, I need to make sure that that's not competing as well. So you need to tune your ears, really. I think that's the only way I can say it, to identify, you know, where those clashes may come in. So if I solo the conga, I'll solo it with the EQ on and without the EQ on. And if you're using your headset or your earphones, you should be able to hear the difference. So let's do it with the EQ on. Let me just slow this. Okay, so that's with the EQ on. If I was to bypass it, you would hear the subtle difference. You hear the subtle difference. So let's leave it on. Let's leave it on. I like that middle section, so I would increase that slightly. That's a bit too high, but you can already tell the difference, you know, when it's maxed out, you know. So with EQ, all you're doing is either adding or subtracting, you know, depending on what the song wants, depending on what the mix wants. So I'll just give you a little boost, you know, just to make sure that sits well within the mix, you know. Let's do the same as well too for my tambourines. Just put some little bit of EQ in there. I want that. Okay, so I like that crunchy sound. So that's within the 10 kilohertz. You know, I'll just boost that up slightly. So that sits well nice. It's not got any low frequency there, so I can roll that off completely. You know, so that frequency is completely silent, you know, and that doesn't clash, you know. So I think that's good enough. What I normally do then, or what I would suggest that you do is, once you're happy with your metronome or with your tempo or with your percussions, now you can start to then build up the melody, you know, start to build up the progressions, the chord progressions. Let's go back into our edit window. Let's start with a piano. A piano is always a safe bet. And with this piano, what I'm going to do is I will play maybe a quick intro and then the actual song. Don't forget that the song we're working on is Who Is Like Unto Thee. Okay, so I've got my instrument track. I'll call this my grand piano. Right there, let's just correct the spelling, grand piano. Okay, So I'll get that ready, and now I'll go back to my virtual instrument to then look for a grand piano. Again, you don't need a physical piano because this is why you have all of your virtual instruments right there. So that's my channel with my grand piano. It's empty. I go in there and then I'm happy. I'm ready to insert one of my instrumentations. I've got this virtual instrument called mini grand. So it's like a baby grand, which you can see right there, you know, and this is what it sounds like if you can hear me play that. So we said our key is E flat, okay? So that sounds good. That sounds good alone, but I can make it better. And that's the beauty around virtual instruments. You know, I can either turn off the brightness, you know, make it more soft or make it more like a ballad. I want it soft because this is a worship song. You know, it's not a praise song. If it was a praise song, I might maybe turn up the frequency right there and make that slightly brighter. But let's make it a bit softer, you know, which should be fine. There's also something I want to do. I like to have a bit of reverb. So when I said reverb, you know, it's the space that you can hear within the sound. Now, if you look at this, it's got some reverb right there. If I max out the reverb, you'll be able to hear it. I'll stop the percussions. So that's what it sounds like normally, okay? So that sounds like it's in a theater, it's in a cathedral. I don't want 100%, definitely not. Maybe somewhere around the midway point should be fine for me. Okay, so that's good enough. It's a bit too soft, so let's make it ballad. Okay, so now we're ready to play. I'll just increase the volume slightly just so that you can hear it. Okay, so now let's do let's track that out. Okay, let's layer down some keys to the song that we are working on. Okay, so I'll go back in. Let's make sure I've got enough percussions to last me for the entire tracking. So again, I'll duplicate this just to make sure that the loop continues to play while I'm working on my melody and my chord progressions. Okay. So let's start with a very simple intro. I'll just run down the scale. I'll just do a major scale rundown and then go straight into the song. So I'm thinking about something like this. Okay, so I can do that. So let's start to do the recording now. Let me get my metronome on. 1, 2, let's go. Here comes the intro. Okay, so that's good. So that's a rough piano take on everything. Okay, so I can mute that, just quantize it, make sure it's well on the grid. So that's my piano line already recorded. Now, the purpose of this is, you know, without the MIDI keyboard, I can't play this piano file. What I would have had to have done is to manually, you know, drag all these different grids that you can see. I would have had to manually paint them in, you know, and that would take a whole lot of time. And that's the importance of getting the right tool, because that speeding up, you know, it quickens your whole production process, you know. So yeah, that's my grand piano done. What else can I add to this? You know, earlier on I mentioned adding the presence, adding some atmosphere. So let's look for a nice sounding strings or hard sound, you know, just to make sure that that presence is definitely there within the song. Okay. Okay, so let's get some strings on. See if I can share my screen back again. There we go. So I'm going to go into my virtual instruments. I know where my sounds are, so I will go find where I can get to. I like a soft part. Let's use this. I think this should. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to experiment. Try and play with different sounds just to find the one that you think would work best. But because I've been using this for a while, I know my go-to sounds. So that's what that sounds like. Oh, that's a bit too loud. So I can reduce that slightly right there so that it just sits in the background. It's not competing with anything. You may not even notice it, and that's what we mean by that atmosphere right there. So what I'll do with this is I'll just leave it on a dominant chord. I'm not going to play the whole line. It's just a sustained sound that just goes, just to keep and support the song. So let's record our atmosphere sound. Let's go back again to the edit window, which you should be able to see now. And then I'll put this as a pad atmosphere. Okay. And then we'll record that now. Sorry, I wasn't recording. Let's do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here we go. Just keep it sustained. Okay, I'll stop it there. Okay, and then again, you're starting to layer, you're starting to arrange, thinking about sounds that would work within this context, so you got your grand piano, you got your pad, you've got your strings, do you want to bring in a guitar sound? And it goes on and on and on and on. And remember when I said at the very beginning, you can't rush this. You can't rush this. If you don't have the time for it, you might as well not do anything. It's a creative process because you keep refining. I might come back to this and say, no, actually, that pad sound is a bit too strong for this. Let's turn it down. Let's replace this with the strings. Or no, I don't like that piano. I want to layer that piano with an electric piano or with an organ. And that's what you keep doing. Going through several iterations of this until you have the finished product. So again, that's just a quick demo. We can spend the next 2, 3, 4 hours just working on this track, making sure that it sounds good. Hopefully that gives you some insights into what we mean. I'm very conscious of time, so I'll just go back again to the slide as we start to wind down the clock. If you can see my screen, where are we? There we go. Okay, so when it comes to your production, like I said, think about the mood, the dynamics, the style that you are going for. What voices do you want to use? What will be your melody line? What will be the chords that you want to play? You need to make these decisions. What type of emotions are you trying to send within the song? That's where all of your different chord progressions would come into play, and hopefully you should be able to do something effective. I think if I was to leave us with any assignments, and I'm more than happy to review or provide some feedback. If you've got the time, over the coming week, just work on something. Look out for a particular song that you will be interested in. Start to make a go on it. If you want me to review, I'll put my email right there at the very end so that you can send them and I can feedback. I can talk you through any other improvement or adjustment you need to make. Just before I go on to the final slide, when I talked about tracking, there's something we call layering. And when it comes to layering, think about space. Professionals would never rely on just one sound. You need to keep layering sound. And that's the beauty, of using a DAW. You can bring in up to 1,000 sounds, on a project, but make sure that there is space. Look out for core sounds. I've told you about the core sounds in gospel music. You'd always have your synth sound, your piano sound, your drums, your guitar sounds, your ear candies, look out for all of those core sounds, and then use EQ to separate them, where you need to pan for width, maybe allow a particular sound come out from the left side or from the right side, that creates space, without the mix feeling as though, there's no space in there, it provides more space again, for the vocals, to shine through better, you're not competing for the same frequencies. I think that's something important that I wanted to draw from there. Yes, Bratayo.
Thank you very much. I know this might not be within the content of this teaching training. How do you change the keys of your recorded backing tracks?
So when you say change the keys, how exactly?
What I mean, like, for example, if what you've done now, let's say you've done it on E flat.
Yeah.
And then you've submitted it to a choir. And they feel, oh, we are not comfortable singing on that key.
Yeah.
We want to change it to like lower it down by, let's say, 2 semitones. How do you change that on these workstations?
It's yeah, good question. So the best way to do it is to transpose down the key to wherever you want to do. So I'll select my grand piano, for example. Now that's the MIDI file of everything I played on the piano. So I've got 2 options. I can either go back and replay this on the key that they want me to record this on, or I can just drag everything to my different key. Does that make sense? You can hear the yeah. So you can transpose it back to whatever key the choir wants you to do it on. But then you need to do the same as well for all of the files that you've Does that make any sense? I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, what did you click on before you started doing that?
You just double click on it. So and that opens up the MIDI editor. So we call this window on the bottom, this long bar, we call it the MIDI editor.
Okay.
The MIDI editor. Okay, and that's where you can adjust, the different files, move it up on the key. Let me see if I can make this a bit bigger. Yeah, there we go. So that's your MIDI editor. So you can move all of the files you've just recorded along the different keys, and that changes it.
All right, thank you.
Yes. Sister Joy.
Do you mind to share the link for the Pro Tools on this
platform?
On this platform, please.
Yeah, absolutely. You mean the link to where to purchase it? Yeah.
Is there a free version?
Yes, there is. There's the Pro Tools intro, which is free, I believe.
Okay,
yes.
Could you send the both, please?
Yeah,
both
that's
the purchase and the free one, please.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Bra Omfom.
Thank you, Apostle John, for this.
Thank you so much.
It's quite insightful. Yeah, my question is still based on the question that brother asked on transposing. What if you've layered up to, let's say, I'm just looking at it, 100 items there, right? And you've got that loads of tracks to work on, and you need to change the key. Is there no way you could probably maybe just do, like, okay, for instance, a Control A? So like you're more like you highlight all of them,
yeah,
and change the key automatically together, or you must do it one by one?
No, you can highlight everything.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you just click on everything, and then that opens. So I've just highlighted the 2 files I've just done, and then that opens up everything right there, which you can see on the bottom. So you can just drag that into the right key that you want. You don't have to do it manually one by one.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problems. Yeah. Any other question? Any other question? That's
sorry, one more question from me.
Yes, please.
I know you did say there is we have the piano, the digital piano.
Yes.
When you were explaining, were you playing on your keyboard there, or is there a way you can do what you've done digitally as well?
Yes. So it's yes and no. So the reason why I say yes and no is you can draw all of these files with your hand. Does that make any sense? So you can do it manually but that's going to take time, and that's why you need a MIDI keyboard to actually play the chords or play the melody line. If that makes any sense, Bratayo.
I know what you mean. So definitely you need the keyboard.
Exactly. It saves you time. And if you're going to get a keyboard, you know, depending on how much chords or octaves you like to run within a particular song, you know, you can get a 2-octave keyboard, a 4-octave keyboard, you know, and that makes your job much easier.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other question? Any other question?
Your email did not appear on the chat. Chat. And again, is this recorded and would it be shared?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I think Bra NS will be able to, or Bra Stephen will be able to respond to that. Bra Stephen.
Okay, Bro John, please, one more question.
Okay.
So, assuming you've finished making this production and you want to, for instance, just maybe sell it, is there a platform that you can share this more like, you know how Google app works?
Yeah.
Like a bank where you can go see different apps like that. So is there that particular where you could just link it up there so that people can buy your backing track, more like a way of making some pounds out of that?
Yeah,
absolutely. And then secondly, there is this particular app I came across, and it's called Audio Evolution Mobile Studio, where you are able to more or less change your keyboard using your digital device. Like if you have an iPad, you could just control everything from your iPad. You could give it all the tones you need. How can we bring that together with what you've just shown, like the Logic Pro and all of that? How do we combine? Because I feel maybe that's just for something different, maybe for the pre-defined audios. You can now play around all of that with maybe adding different pitch to it.
Thank you.
So how can you make? What's the walk around with all those other apps that are already there in the App Store?
Okay, yeah, good question. Thank you. Yeah, just going back to the first question. Yes, there are sites that you can upload your productions on, you know, and if you want to commercialize it, you know, absolutely. They also it depends on which angle you want to go through. You know, there are some people who like to do productions and just give that out for people to hear. You know, you've got your popular SoundCloud. You know, you can open up a YouTube account. You know, and that drags more people to see the work you've done. But if you want to go for the monetary aspect of it, there are sites like Airbit, AIRBIT, you know, where you can put in your productions. There are sites like Bandcamp, where you can monetize, you know, and people who are interested, you know, in whatever track you've created, would pay some good money, you know, to have the stems. So yes, 100%. You can market it if you want. And then in terms of other apps as well that work with this, Pro Tools, and not just Pro Tools, most of these doors allow for third-party compatibility. So if you've got maybe a device or, you know, another application, or you want to connect it with an iPad and use that to connect, remotely work on something else, absolutely, it does work. I'm not quite familiar with Audio Evolution Studio that you mentioned, but I can look it up. Well, I'm sure it will be something that will be compatible, because most of all of these big players, you know, they have that access, you know, to combine multiple applications. So hopefully it should.
Okay, please, one last question.
Yeah.
How do we handle intellectual property?
Good question. Very, very good question. So this now again, depending on how advanced you're going into this, you know, depending on how much of it is yours. Because even in terms of big creation, you know, there's the sample files that you will find on the internet, that may not be for you, and you've got to, like you said, give up, credit those individuals. There is a book I'm going to recommend, and maybe I'll drop that in the chat before the end of this section. It talks about the whole business in terms of making beats, in terms of making tracks and selling that. I don't think we can cover all of that within this section, but you will need to register yourself to a body. Okay, and that body is what would help manage, the royalties that comes from it, manage, anything in terms of infringement, in terms of copyright laws and all of that. They will be the one to do that on your behalf. But yeah, I would drop the name of the book in the chat so that you can read that up, if that answers the question.
Okay, please, one last question.
Okay.
And maybe I would like to bring in maybe Brightness can also maybe throw more light to this if he's on the call. So we know you did mention this probably earlier during the theory part of your discussion. So for the peculiarity of the kind of church we have, there are certain instruments that if we want to make backing tracks for, they are the obvious. We don't use guitar, we don't use the drums. But in our churches, we do use beats. How do we balance this? This is just for personally for deeper life use. How do we balance this with respect to what the church stands for in terms of all these instruments?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very good question. It's also a very delicate one. I think my response would be to adhere to whatever the policy is. I know now within the UK, every region is autonomous. What might be allowed in Manchester may not be allowed in Yorkshire, or the way you do your praise and worship might slightly differ to how we do ours. But I would say this is where, again, consultation would have to go in with the music director, the choir leaders within the region, to understand what the boundaries are in relation to what you can use, what you cannot use. I know on a global stage, there's restrictions in terms of beats that we use. So all of your programmable beats, we can't do that. In some regions, there's restrictions as to whether you can use, a guitar live or not, or pre-recorded. So I think this is where you would have to speak with, the leaders within your location to see what those boundaries are, where the room for flexibility is. And like I said, at the end of the day, regardless of whether the rules are, we are there just as a support tool, and whatever we do is there to enhance, the experiences of people coming. So regardless of those restrictions, there's still workarounds, that you can use. If there's a restriction on don't use a beat, you can use a simple shaker, and that keeps everyone in check. You don't need a full 8-piece drum set. You don't need a rock kit, in order to keep the rhythm. Just a simple shaker loops would do the job. If they say, well, you can't use certain type of instrument, there's other alternative. And that's why I was talking to us about the different types of string instruments. You can't use a rock sounding guitar, an acoustic guitar, but there's other softer ones that would work well within that context. So I think that would be my approach if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I'd have to jump in now just because we are just a couple minutes past 9 o'clock. But that was really, really massive, and I want to say a big thank you to you, but John, for taking the time. That was quite exhaustive, compressing all of those so many elements into just one session. I'd like to say maybe you come back again for a part 2, but that's not in my hands, not in my power at all. But that was really, really a great one. And I really want to believe that.
But Steve, can we just take Engineer Israel? Finally, his hand has been up since.
Oh, okay. Apologies. Okay, Engineer Israel, let's have you.
Thank you very much. I hope I can be heard.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, Prof, you can be heard.
One, I need to find out. I hope we have a recording of this session so we could gain access to it and learn at our own pace, because I know we're trying to pull up a whole lot of things into a shorter time. So the ability to be fast was there. As one. Number two, the application that is used, I don't know if the interface for the other ones, like the Logic Pro, are they more of the same like the one that you're using now, or the way evaluating a Logic Pro, do we need to have go learn something completely different from what you have here? At the point you did the looping and you use a shortcut Control T, does it apply to other applications? That's two. The third one, which should be the last one, is if one doesn't have the MIDI keyboard to play in directly, are there any ways of maybe having kind of the computer keyboard, some of the keys maybe converted to the keys to on a virtual scale to run that? Or is it possible to maybe use an AI tool to generate a sound and then import it into the Logic Pro or any of the apps, and then we can edit it, maybe move things around to customize it to what we need to produce the kind of sequences that we want?
Thank you. Thank you, Engineer Israel. Yeah, just going back to the first question, I think the host would answer that one. But the second one about the DAW, which one should you be using? I'll say that the principle is the same across the board, honestly. Whatever it is that I've done, you can as well do that on Logic. In terms of duplicating, it's the same command. The only difference is the interface, where you find maybe different functions, it might be differently placed, but the principle is the same. The same way I've just done this little instrumentation, it's the same way you can do that across all that DAWs, regardless of which one. And my advice would be, start with one that you're comfortable with, learn it in-depthly, and then, if you have the time to experiment with other ones, you can to then see the differences. But my go-to is always Pro Tools. And then secondly, as well, too, in terms of the MIDI keyboard that you mentioned, yes, you can customize the keyboard on your laptop to actually play the sound. But that would not be advisable, because you would struggle when it comes to chord progression, when it comes to melody line. There's only so much you can play using A, B, C, D, E, F on your actual keyboard. I would say if you can get a MIDI keyboard, that would be advisable. If already you have existing keyboard, maybe a practice keyboard, just check, make sure that it's got a USB-C or a USB-A port at the back, and you can use that for MIDI as well, if that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think you didn't touch the issue of maybe using an AI tool to generate a track, and can you bring that up here?
I haven't tried that before, so I won't be able to comment on whether you can use that. Probably it's maybe something I'll need to look
Thank
into
you very
for the
much.
next.
I'm grateful.
Yeah.
Steven, I think you're mute if you're speaking.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, I was just saying I'd like to thank Bro John again for taking the time and sharing this great knowledge with us. Let's just appreciate Bro John with the emoji or a warm heart out there. Just put our hands together for Bro John. Yeah, that was really, really good. And just to encourage each and every one of us still that we've seen how beneficial this actually is to us as a unit. And it is important that we also still, jump into sessions like this when it's been, posted, and also invite other people who, might benefit from it. And this brings us to the close of today's session, and I believe it has been very useful and helpful for ourselves, even as we go further to, harness the skill we've got, and also make practice, and try to make further development by ourselves, and that will be really, really helpful to like grow this knowledge with God. But just before we go, also again, just to appreciate Bro Ernest again for this platform, and I just like us to just take this to God in prayers, just commit the knowledge we've received into God's hands. We're not just learning this to just use just for our own self, but we want to also prosper the kingdom of God through our ministry, the ministry God's given unto us. And I just want us to first thank God for this opportunity. It's not one we easily find out there. People would have to like pay to get this opportunity to learn like this, but it's been given to us. And it's a great thing that we have such kind of resource person amongst us, and who are actually happy to like pour out this knowledge. Let's just bless God. Let's thank Him, and that's everything we've learned. He will commit to our memory. He would also help us to practice on our own. Develop personally. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Lord, we ask that we commit all that we've learned into your hands, and we pray that you open up our understanding, that we would go further, not just dropping everything we've learned here, but we would on our own try to learn and try to develop ourselves, just so that the work you've committed into our hands will grow. And through this ministry, we will reach out to others, we will win souls for you in the name of Jesus. For in Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. And that brings us to the close of today's session.